This presentation is going to be on something we call Kecksburg Solved. Owen Eichler contacted me, I guess about 2 years now?
2 years.
2 years ago, right around this time, and told me he had a theory for Kecksburg. And I said, yeah, right. So you're going to have to convince me. And I gave him a real hard time with every aspect of it and the evidence. And he's got a good theory. So this is Owen's theory. I told him if you could convince me, I will let you present it. And we even wrote an article for the MUFON Journal that we put out there. And I think it's as good a theory as any, and it's probably the correct theory. But you can't still rule out like the Bell Project. It could have been that or some other government thing that they were working on. But so that's how this got started about 2 years ago. And what we believe it is that it was actually a GE Mark II reentry vehicle, which was a spy satellite over Russia. And we will go into that. And there's really a lot of evidence that goes along with that. First thing I want to mention is that I was contacted recently that there's going to be a Kecksburg movie, a feature film. So I said, oh, so you're going to show a spy satellite? He said, no, there's going to be creatures and aliens in the ship, and it's a horror sci-fi movie with aliens in a spaceship and all of that. But Fred Saluga has a role in it. Who are you going to play, Fred? They give you a part yet?
Yeah.
The Undertaker?
Got him, yeah. Got him, Murphy goes to sea.
Oh, okay. Then Murphy, the reporter, goes to sea. I'm a field investigator in it, and I guess during like an alien autopsy type thing. So I think it'd be a good movie. It's a local guy in Pennsylvania that's doing it, and we're going to start filming next spring. It'll be fun. Owen's, he's not going to go see it, I'm sure. Okay. I've been showing this slide in all my presentations that, I think when we're talking about this subject, you really got to have credibility, and this presentation is very scientific, and a lot of what you're seeing now with the UFO field is really what I consider entertainment. This is a cool slide I found, with the aliens beating up Giorgio. Quit making stuff up.
Why'd you got a green suit on?
Well, there you go. But that show was really good the first 3 seasons. I liked it. And then when Da Vinci was an alien and Einstein and everybody who's ever invented anything had to be alien, this microphone couldn't be invented by humans. It does humans a disservice. And that's why they allowed it to stay on. And that's why Hangar 1 is not on. Because Hangar 1 was too close to the truth. Military bases, space weapons, underground bases, all of that. This is okay to be on, just like messing with Sasquatch, because it's all entertainment. Okay? Fred, what do you think of that messing with Sasquatch? You like that? Huh?
I disagree with these entertainment.
Well, the commercial. I'm saying the commercial's entertainment, not Bigfoot. It's making fun of Bigfoot and making fun of aliens. Because what's worse than ancient aliens and the 1950s contact movement? You talk about losing credibility. No reputable scientist is going to come forward in this field when he has to deal with Giorgio and messing with Sasquatch. You get laughed at, right? And I think Kathy probably already just spoke about that. I wasn't in here for that. I do want to say that there are, I think there's a laser, there you go. There are some really good UFO cases documented, plenty of them. My personal opinion, the modern day UFO started in 1942 with the Battle of LA. Don't disregard the 1936 Black Forest crash. And I'll talk about that in next year's presentation called The String Theory of the Unexplained. I'm also doing that down in Greensburg for our Pittsburgh conference. It wasn't Roswell. It was the Black Forest crash. But we'll talk about that later. And I can prove that. There's a lot to back that up with the Nazis and Project Paperclip. But this one here in 1942, everybody says Roswell, but this started it because it was the first time, if you can get a good picture of this and look it up, you see a dome-shaped craft right there. And you can look it up online. A real good story with it. It's the first time we fired. That's the firing at it, when the anti-aircraft shells, those little dots. All 9 of these lights stop on something, right? If it's not there, the lights would keep going. So they're hitting something. There's a dome-shaped craft. That's the anti-aircraft firing, 1,433 rounds. First time we fired on a UFO, first time they denied the UFO, and the first time they used the weather balloon excuse. It wasn't Roswell, it was this one. And there was a memo from General Marshall that came out of this one where he said something was struck, maybe this one, and it went down off the coast of California. And he asked that we form an investigative group, and they did. And that's in documents called the IPU, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. That's a fact. It all came from this one. So the Battle of LA, to me, was a good one. But I'm going to convince you next year, this whole thing started with the Black Forest crash in Nazi Germany. Either way, it's 75, 85-year-old phenomenon, modern. This one here, 1965, Rex Heflin was a highway accident investigator. So you're going to believe him? When he reports a UFO, I would think you would believe him, right? He takes pictures. They've never been able to debunk these pictures. They said they're good pictures. And to me, the deciding factor is not really that, because I don't know what that is. You got throwing that up in the air, right? Here you see a dust. Whatever that is causing a dust cloud, a little thing right there. So they can't disprove that picture. That's a good one. And like I said, there's many, many good cases. Your Prescott Island case that we talked about last year up here was anniversary was really good. Okay, you know, the MUFON Symposium this year in July is talking about the outer space, the secret space program. And Project Solar Warden is what Gary McKinnon found, and he's going to be one of the speakers at the MUFON Symposium in Vegas. So this is another good one. But I want to point out to you is, how many of you knew we were flying a drone space shuttle since 1999? This is it. How many of you, raise your hand if you knew we had a drone space, I think I told you this last year, this, but yeah, we've been flying a drone space shuttle since 1999. And when I saw it was in December of 2012, and they said on the news they had it landing on an aircraft carrier. It had been in space since 2010. So it was almost 3 years it was in space, 2.5 years. It went over everybody's head. That's why Obama canceled the space shuttle program, because we have this. And we got a lot more. I think the Phoenix Lights, I think the Hudson Valley case, I think that's all our stuff. That's our military stuff that we see in the modern era. But this is just so you can look at it. I mean, that's our space shuttle. That's the drone one. And it was in space for 3 years. It's amazing how nobody questioned it. Nobody has questioned this at all. Okay, I told you how I met Owen. He had a professional photographer come to his house and take that picture. But it's been about 2 years now, and he did a good job. He's got a background in engineering, and what's the rest of your background? Why don't you tell him about yourself rather than me?
Okay. Hello? Okay. I'm a retired engineer for Westinghouse. I spent many years in power engineering. Spent some time teaching some school, but mostly I focused in on the Kecksburg project. That's what we want to talk to you about today. And my background, as far as education goes in chemistry and physics, allowed me to investigate this story in much more depth than it has ever been done before. And you'll hear later on today some quite amazing information that has not been released before.
And Owen was a witness to Kecksburg. A lot of the other people who talked about this didn't see it come down. He saw it come down. He'll tell you about that. Yeah, that's my New York accent. Remember, we're closer to New York right now than anywhere else. When he first contacted me, I said, yeah, he told me the whole story. I said, email me. I filed it. And then I was reading Major Kehoe's book, Aliens from Space, 1973 book. And he talked about the green fireballs over New Mexico and Dr. La Paz that was trying to figure out the green fireballs in the late 50s, early 60s, late 50s.
Actually, the 40s, late 40s.
But a light bulb went off, and I said, wait a second, Owen was just telling me the reason Kecksburg glowed green coming down. And then I said, you know what? They were testing, and we'll get to it, they were testing that technology in the late 50s, and Kecksburg is 65, right? I said, he has something here. That's what got me back into this. I called him up, pretended I didn't delete his emails, and I said, tell me your story again, and re-email me. And he did. And I think this is pretty good. So I think this theory explains the green fireballs over New Mexico in the late 50s and why Kecksburg glowed green coming down.
I'd like to take a minute. Look at this. Let me get the pointer out here.
It's on the top of it.
Got it.
Hold the mic closer, please.
You see this spot right here? It looks like a triangle. That you will see in the upcoming slide is what we've been talking about with this reentry vehicle. And it's such a great picture because it shows the cloud of vapor, the ionized vapor cloud of the atmosphere right ahead of the reentry vehicle.
Okay, that went over my head also. All right, so here's a couple of things that were said. And one was that it glowed green coming down. It looked like the first witness who called it into the radio station where John Murphy was said, and I can't remember her name, said it looked like a 4-pointed star. Okay? It had 4 control jets on it to be used in outer space. It didn't, they would have been on, you would have seen it. That's why she said it looked like a 4-pointed star. But they were really meant when you were out of the atmosphere, then you could use them to turn it. And what Owen told me is that it had a copper alloy heat shield, which is why it glowed green. So why don't you tell me a little more about that?
Sure. The heat shield itself was made out of copper and alloying materials such as beryllium.
You gotta put the mic closer to you.
Such as beryllium. And the idea was as the reentry vehicle is coming into the atmosphere and it encounters the heavy atmosphere, frictions developed, and the material that the heat shield's made out of will change physical properties, one of which the physical properties is the color. And you can tell right off the beginning of it that the green color is reflective of copper. In addition, as we'll see later on in a picture, the vehicle, the afterbody of the vehicle, which is shaped kind of like a funnel, a closing end of a funnel, had been talked about as being seamless and being colored bronze color. The way they were made by the corporation, GE Corporation and Avco Corporation, was made by an electroforming process where the whole entire afterbody is dipped into a vat of molten metal, electrical current is put through it, and the metal itself just attaches right to the mold. It attaches right to the mold and makes a perfectly seamless vehicle. Now, the reason that's important is after it was made, it was coated in copper and then coated in platinum. And so whenever it goes through the atmosphere, the heat burns off the outer material, and you see that copper or bronze color is all you have left.
Yeah, and that woman was Frances Kalp, was the woman who reported it looking like a 4-pointed star. So he's answered a couple of my questions. Why it glowed green, why she said it looked like a 4-pointed star. Now, it also made a couple of turns, which was another thing. I said, okay, Mr. Owen, tell me how it turned, you know? And this is, if you look at this, the purple is how it should have come in over Canada, the trajectory, and it looked like it was going to hit Pittsburgh, right? Somehow it's coming, it turns to the right, and it turns back to the left after it missed the population centers. Okay, kind of reminded me of Flight 93. That once it got over where I live, Greensburg, Latrobe, which is populated, and got out into the rural, that's when that plane went down. And I think we shot that one down, but whatever. So why don't you tell them how you're better at this, tell them how you're able to make this 6x6 triangle make a turn.
Okay. We again go back to the formation of it, how it was made, which is the big heavy copper heat shield in front and an afterbody that looks like a funnel going down to the smaller size. Now, atmosphere does funny things to objects that are traveling through it at a higher speed. For example, there was an incident that happened 3-4 years ago. It was on YouTube where a man and his girlfriend were standing on a very tall bridge. There was an updraft. They had a basketball with them. They threw the basketball down, and as they did that, the basketball was turning. The funny thing happened was the way the wind caught that and the turning, it accentuated the turn in the direction it was going and made the basketball come straight up, which I'm sure you guys understand. Baseballs do the same thing, golf balls do the same thing. Now on this reentry vehicle, it's a same case. There's an aerodynamic quality to the heat shield. It's a semicircular type, not flat, but semicircular type heat shield. The idea is as it's coming forward with the heavy end of the funnel and it encounters the wind or the atmosphere, if it's tilted in a direction up, down, or sideways, it tends to follow that direction, just like a softball would or a golf ball would. And that's how these things were controlled. They were controlled internally, though, with shifting weights. So you can imagine if the weight inside was pushed forward to the vehicle, the front of the vehicle gets heavier and drops. That makes it turn or makes it drop. They move the weight back, it can go up. Similar sideways, you have a pendulum type weight, and that pendulum can move and kick the vehicle to make a left or a right-hand turn. And it's just natural aerodynamics.
And in the material that Owen sent me, I went through it reading it, and there was a general in there who said that they could pretty much get that GE Mark II to land in a precise location. I mean, I don't think they could get it to land right here, but I think they can get it to land where this building is. You know, and you're talking about 1965 technology. There was also a meteor that came down that night, and that's the, if you can see that, the trail of the meteor over Detroit. Just to explain, these were launched, polar launches from the South Pacific, and they would be launched south from Johnson Island near Hawaii, over under the South Pole, come around as there it's spun, timed to come over Russia, take its pictures, be back over the Pacific, eject the camera system, which is what they recovered, and the satellite would fall into the ocean with an atomic generator in it, and there were hundreds of these. And those and nobody talks about that. These atomic generators are in the bottom of the Pacific. But you know, that's our military. All right. Here's the prototype drawing. Owen already said it had a weight and balance system for maneuvering by shifting it back and forth. We know that it had a small atomic powered source in it, and you know, really explains, if you can see that, you know, what it has, etc. And you know, that's what it looked like.
And give me a minute. And you'll notice, like John had said, we were talking about the film capsule. This was specifically designed for that purpose. This cap would lift off the top of the vehicle, or the back end of the vehicle here would open a hatch, just like a hatch in a submarine. And this would be explosively released. A drug parachute would come out, and as it came down, a plane would come by with a hook. Oh, forgot about the jets. Plane would come by with the hook to grab the parachute, and they had the film. The trajectory control jets, there were 4 of them. We only see one here. We have an antenna. People wanted to know back last year, how could they send radio signals to this through an ionized atmosphere? What that means is this is coming through close to the speed of sound. As this is coming through the atmosphere close to the speed of sound, there's an ionized cloud that develops, and it causes a temporary blackout. And so in the early models, these did, at that time, black out, but only for a short period of time.
Okay, so I say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So what you have here, it's the only notarized statement by Jerry Betters. He drew this. Here's the Army truck. Here's the thing that was on it. with some symbols on the bottom, including a five-pointed star. This is what one looks like in its holding case. This white and brown has to come off. It had one seam, which they said they didn't see a seam. So we're saying that since it was laying on its side, the seam was face down. But here it is, here that is. I mean, to me, it looks just like it. It has a little porthole there too for the camera system, and I say this was laying face down. Here you go. Do you want to say something?
Yes, and we also want to point out, I said earlier, that these were electroformed. What you're looking at here is a lab model they probably used for demonstration. The ones that were finished, and I have pictures and documentation, and electroform, smooth, very, very smooth, little wind resistance whatsoever. And they were used for many missions. In this particular case, they probably had a camera out that window. But they also they had radiation sensors on them. For example, when we had Operation Dominic and Operation Hardtack, where we sent up a 1.14 megaton bomb in the atmosphere, not too far from Hawaii, they sent these up with monitoring equipment on, so they knew the strength of the explosion, and they could take air samples, temperatures, and they knew a little bit more about just what an atomic bomb would do in the atmosphere. And later that did cause major problems, not for us, but all over the world, with cows in all different countries, with contamination from throwing up that huge explosion and all the radioactive particles and dust coming down.
And one of the things was to find a picture of one, because they were all dropped in the Pacific. So there was one, I don't know if you remember where it was, but it was in a holding case, and it was never actually flown, but it's in that holding case, and we asked them if they could remove it and see if there were markings on it, but they weren't going to do that for us. So
that was a museum in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And otherwise, you don't have these to take a look at. There's really none out there to examine. So now some of the other theories were, if you remember the Kecksburg story, was that Cosmos 96, it was a Russian satellite, which was sent up before the Kecksburg incident, and NASA said that it came down 13 hours before the Kecksburg incident. And if you look at Cosmos 96, right, it looks like the thing from Lost in Space. But this whole thing would have broken apart. You know, it's not aerodynamic enough, and Cosmos 96 did break apart over Canada, and they didn't even bother to go looking for it because it was over, a heavily wooded area. But the one thing that struck me, though, is that the Russians said they thought something hit Cosmos 96. Now think about it. We're launching these spy satellites over Russia. They don't know it, because it's high altitude, even some of them were low altitude, and it could have been coming around. It may have clipped Cosmos 96, which caused both of them to go offline, one landing in Canada and one landing in Pennsylvania. To me, it makes perfect sense. Now, the Bell theory, which has been popular, I think since the UFO Hunters TV show was on, was theorized by Igor Witkowski in the year 2000. And this is actually a museum in Germany where they have the Glock, the bell, Nazi bell, that they were working on as an anti-gravity type mechanism. I don't discount that, because we know, like I told you, 1936 was the Black Forest UFO crash. The Nazis were heavily into this type of, into the whole occult, the Vril, all of that. Part of Project Paperclip, what we got was what formed our entire space program with NASA and the rockets, and they had the V2s, the V7s, and they were working on this. So really the question, in my mind is, was there a craft already made or almost completed that we got after World War II in 1945, and that was the Roswell crash? Maybe. I'm telling you, the 1936 one was definitely an extraterrestrial craft. Roswell could have been ET, or it could have been something we got from Project Paperclip. And Kecksburg could have been the Bell. I mean, you're talking 20 years later, from 1945 to 65, something the government was working on.
Now, I want to bring up an alternative theory on this. John has an opinion that it could have been something German. But I do know there was many stories about the Germans working on something within a cave. And they had assumed it was the Glock. They talked that it had glowed different colors. Many of the technicians and a few of the scientists had died working around it. My theory has been that that was a centrifuge, very early centrifuge, because at the time there wasn't enough uranium in the purest state to be used for a bomb. So even today, and Iraq's doing it, Korea's doing it, everybody's doing it, they have to have centrifuges to make the uranium, which is composed of many isotopes. It has to be the right isotope and the right quantity to work. And it could very well have had an accident. For example, there was an accident that happened in our own nuclear program back in the 40s, and I'm very much aware of it because I worked in a nuclear facility where two guys were working 2 shifts with a vat of uranium oxide liquefied. They were adding to the contents like they should, a recipe, but they got mixed up. One guy added, another guy double added when he went the other way. When they shut the machine off, all this stuff come back together, and then when it did, it started a fission process and they both died. So it's very understandable that you can have an accident happen, as maybe the German scientists did. They really didn't know what they were doing, they were experimenting. So that was my other alternative theory. I like to keep my mind open for anything that possibly explains what they were doing.
And the interesting thing with that is there's nobody left to interview because they killed all of the concentration camp workers and the scientists that were working on this. When they decided they were pulling out, they killed them all. So now there was no witnesses, nobody to ask. But one of the reasons we know this is real is it used red mercury, which you compress and spin at a certain rate, and it defies gravity 89%. And at the end of World War II, there were a bunch of U-boats, which are submarines, and they were heading towards Argentina and
Japan,
Antarctic. And 2 of them that we captured were carrying barrels of red mercury. The only reason you would carry that, I mean, you're running for your life. You'd have gold, you'd have things you can barter with in South America. What are you going to do with red mercury? It was used in an anti-gravity machine. And I'm telling you, as Americans, we've put too much emphasis on Roswell. Maybe it was alien, maybe it was a government project. The 1936 Black Forest crash started all of this. And that's why we got all of this from the Germans. That's where it came from. Project Paperclip. Okay, so we're saying it was a spy satellite. The documents that Owen showed me were not released to the public until 1991. So from 1965, 26 years basically, I think they hold them 25 years, it's released. There was a December 7th and a December 9th launch out of Johnson Island. So either one of those could have been the one that landed in Kecksburg. I mean, Owen even figured out the time zones and how much time it would take to come down, and we calculated 39 hours. And was that low Earth orbit or just 39 hours overall from Johnson Island to come down over here?
overall.
Overall.
And you'll notice,
Some of us aren't familiar with Kecksburg. I am, but there's others here that may not be. In 2 sentences or so, can you just say what it was and where it was?
Okay, well, Kecksburg is 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. It was December 9th, 1965. Something came down. It was glowing green. It had, it looked like a 4-pointed star. It made a couple of turns, and it crashed in the woods of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. And as we're going to get to next, the military showed up in 40 minutes, although they denied that they tracked it on radar. But we know the Canadians tracked it. Now, what's the chances that our military wasn't tracking it, but the Canadians were? Come on. You know, they got caught in lie after lie after lie with Kecksburg. You know, and we're saying it was actually they were covering up the spy satellite. This one wasn't really a alien craft.
and you'll notice at the top of that rocket that we just had up, John, you can see the re-entry vehicle with the blunt side up. The cone side is down. right below it in that other black spot is where the control was, the computerized control. But, and that's a big but, we're looking right now that in that secondary black spot was a solid rocket booster, small solid rocket booster, and that's coming later on in the presentation.
Okay, so I already mentioned that Canada tracked it on radar. We know that. We also know from witnesses the Army, the Air Force, and NASA responded in 40 minutes under what was called Project Moon Dust protocols. That was in place for anything that came down from out of space. One of the things, I kind of put this picture here, they went into the woods, 4 NASA guys in white radiation suits went into the woods carrying a box, okay, which I think was a lead box to cut out the atomic power source. And there was a blue arcing that was seen in the woods, which could have been the torch to cut it out. And Owen has some additional thoughts on that. Here you go.
Okay, let's look at the first one, the electrical system arc blue. Now this was John and I's first attempt when we got together to explain what this blue arcing was in the woods, light flashing. Well, since then I've been looking at the solid rocket booster that we were talking about. That's the secondary booster. And that project is, I've been on it full time for a year now and discovered that there was a chemical called thiokol invented by 2 scientists in 1929. It was first mixed up out of natural rubber and sulfur called polysulfides. The idea was that they wanted to have something that was resistant to all kinds of solvents, chemicals. They even thought about, and they do use it today in gaskets. It was one of the gaskets that failed on the Space Shuttle Challenger, which blew off the side of the solid rocket booster there, and those people died. But basically it sat around for a long time. No one came up with a use for it. Then they got an idea. If they kept this thiokol, which was a black tar type substance, it could be mixed with rocket propellant, powdered rocket propellant, in a homogeneous solution. And as it's mixed, the rocket propellant sits in the thiokol, dries to a point at which it can be used later and ignited. And instead of it blowing up all at one time, what it will do is send out a steady stream of propulsion. And there's various designs for them. So now we're finding out sulfur, polysulfides, thiokol burns blue. That's where we're thinking that solid rocket fuel booster came apart or was exhausted. And at that point, it probably dropped tar because we've had reports of fires in fields on the path, the entry path. We found out that there were parts and pieces of a material called graphene picked up. Now, graphene is something that is found in nature, but not in large quantities, usually around volcanic areas, because it's a case where carbons, oils, are basically baked and cooked. And it comes up, it has some very useful properties that we're still investigating today. But that was found in a field by a couple of boys. We have a report that Stan Gordon had it in his hand, which is a fellow researcher. We don't know where it's at today, but we'd love to get our hands on that piece of evidence and see if it matches the same recipe as the thiokol. And moving on, the box. We're now starting to get some information that points that maybe that 4x4 box wasn't just the only one. I have had someone tell me that it was used to carry out bits and pieces of the solid rocket fuel booster. And the whole entire area smelt like rotten eggs, they called it. Sulfur, which is the worst part about a thiokol booster. It stinks, and it's unmistakable. So we did some research there and found out that where the vehicle landed, there's no coal, there's no sulfur-producing natural elements in the area. There's no steel mills to smelt any steel, no coke, nothing. So where'd this overpowering smell come from? It came from the thiokol.
Okay, this is a close-up. This would be, like Owen said, it's sent up, that's the heat shield, et cetera, and that's the way it's sent up. And you can see some markings on here, which may or may not have been the markings that, people reported who got up close to it. Okay, again, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here, this was a reenactment for the Unsolved Mysteries case, where they recreated it. And this one's a little bigger than the actual one, because they think it was 8 feet. But I can prove to you it wasn't 8 feet. We'll get to that. The real one that we have is just under 6 feet high and 6 feet wide. And that's the piece that you saw on the rocket. But if you look at the two, very, very similar in size, in dynamics.
And also, I'd like to point out, at the time, there wasn't a rocket, either Russian or American, that could pick up anything 10 foot wide. None of them. The vehicle you're looking at on the right side of the screen weighed with an atomic bomb in it, which is what they were originally used for, intercontinental missile, weighed 3,500 pounds. Now, we know we have witnesses that say what they had saw in the woods, or seen in the woods, was 10 foot long, 10 foot wide. There wasn't a rocket at all by any country that could pick that up. So we know that's an over-exaggeration. But that does come to something we're going to talk about later, which is the solid fuel rocket fuel booster and what its configuration looked like, because now we feel that two different people saw two different things, and there wasn't just one object.
And you can see here, there's no seam, right? That seam I showed you with the portholes on the other side, so you don't see it. And I think right up there it talks about it had a copper alloy heat shield. So we know that's a fact that it did.
And that it exists.
And it exists. Okay, one of the other things seen by the witnesses who got close, and one witness in particular, well, a couple of them, Jerry Betters and a few others, they said there was a 5-pointed star with a circle in the center. So Owen researched that, and back then, here is the Army, 5-pointed star with a circle. Here's the Air Force, 5-pointed star with a circle. So here's a sketch that was done from one of the witnesses' description, right? There's the 5-pointed star with the circle in it, and those markings were along the base. This is, an artist's rendition of it. So, I said, okay, so the disk we sent up on Voyager, how did we show our star system? Would aliens be using a 5-pointed star? Well, when we sent the Voyager disk up, we showed it as a star with light coming out, right? And then the planets. And another way of showing a star would be like the sun, but I think that's a human creation of drawing, So the 5-pointed star with the circle in the middle is a military symbol. If you saw that on this craft, come on, that's not an alien craft. It can't be. That's a military symbol that's on the craft.
Go back to the other slide. I want to show them something.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, I needed the pointer.
It's up top.
Okay. I think I need to go back I have to go back another slide here, I believe.
We can go to the beginning. Start all over.
No, not that far. Oh, here we go. Look right in this area here. I don't know that you can see it, but I did a reverse video of that. It's not on the slide. The reverse video actually shows what we're talking about, an impregnated star in that area. But that itself is no proof. We needed more proof. And so up on the top end, here we find, right there, we find a small symbol that kind of looks like a French, archaic French symbol. I can't remember the term right now, but it's definitely imprinted in the metal. So it's not a stretch to think that these were marked. Incidentally, we need to tell where this picture came from. These were Nick Pope would know about these.
He's back there.
Yeah, he is. He's back there. These were the guys from England that operated the Thor missiles. Do you recall, Nick? And we sent over a lot of people to train them on how to use these. So they were in charge of 60 of these Thor rockets with these reentry vehicles. Those were returned back to us, along with Jupiter missiles, which carried the same warhead that were based in Turkey. That was an agreement after Khrushchev and Kennedy battled out over Cuba. And to get the missiles out of Cuba, Kennedy had to give these up. So they then became a source for all kinds of use. They had an inventory of somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 120 usable boosters and reentry vehicles.
What's that right there?
I think Nick would know.
I think that they were playing paintball when the officers. That's what that is. No, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's Japanese. I don't know. Okay, so all right. So you know the chances of the five-pointed star with the circle being alien, when we already showed you it's a military symbol, and then when they said that it was 10 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet in size. I looked up how big were flatbeds back then. Well, flatbeds today are 7.5 feet wide, and back then they were 6 inches less. So they were right about 7 feet wide. And every witness, I went to Kecksburg for the reunion, I asked them, was it hanging over the side of the flatbed? And they said, no, it fit on it. One witness even said it looked like the size of like even luggage, like small. He said it wasn't that big. So I think the odds are it was under 7 feet. And the GE Mark II is just under 6 feet, which makes sense. It fit on the flatbed. So every aspect of Kecksburg we're pretty much explaining away. So we say it was covered up to protect a spy program, and possibly, I say that they cut that atomic generator out of it because they couldn't have it leaking down the turnpike. They had to remove it, and Owen told you his theory. We know Project Blue Book lied about it. They lied. They said only 4 military officers showed up. The witnesses said there were about 2 dozen Army. There were 4 from NASA, and I think it was 4 from the Air Force. So they got caught in lies all over the place as far as explaining Kecksburg. And the official Blue Book explanation is it was a meteor. Well, show me another meteor that you sent the military in to recover. There are no other meteors that we went to recover. And nothing about this adds up to a meteor. So the choices are the Blue Book explanation that it was a meteor. It was an alien UFO craft. Cosmos 96, which I think we all agree it wasn't, but it may have been, we may have hit Cosmos 96. Nazi Bell, very possible. U.S. spy satellite, very possible. We know that was in existence. We think that was. All right, so we went public with this. We came out of the closet. We went public.
Excuse me?
And what happened was MUFON published it in the MUFON Journal. This is the article that, and oh, look, it was by John Ventre and Owen Eichler. They put my name first.
Yeah.
Because I work for them. Well, I don't get paid. So we put it out there. And
You might never get paid either.
and it also got put on Stars and Stripes, which was a military website, which was good. The reporter who broke this story for us locally on the Post-Gazette, he put it out there on the military website, and that led to something else which we'll tell you about. So who covered it locally there in Pittsburgh area was KDKA Radio, PCNC Cable News, the Post-Gazette was the one who broke the story. The Tribune Review would not run the story, and Owen called the editor there, and they had some words. But their explanation to me was it would hurt the Kecksburg Fire Department fundraiser. That's what they said. So, are we looking for truth? Or are we looking for, sensationalism? But they wouldn't run it. Another thing that I find too, and that's why I showed the first slide with Giorgio and Jack Links and all of that, is what are we interested in? Are we interested in disclosure and the truth, or just good stories? So I had done Coast to Coast radio in 2014 on my alternative history book, which is an ancient alien novel, basically. And I did great. I sold 300 books in the first week with that book because George Knapp and I discussed it. So then we broke, Owen and I with Connie Willis on Coast to Coast, we broke this story October 3rd of 15. We wanted to do it right before the December 5th date. And so I sold 7 books compared to 300. Nobody was interested in the Kecksburg story. It's unbelievable, unbelievable. So it kind of, you know, it says Tribune Review doesn't want to hurt the fire department's fundraiser. The public wasn't interested in solving a UFO case. They want to know, like the Kecksburg movie that's going to do really good because there's aliens in that one. And I'm part of the alien autopsy in the movie. So, you know, it said something about it. I was a little disappointed with that. I thought there'd be a lot more press over solving Kecksburg. But that's all true. So I asked Owen, okay, so one of the complaints, and we'll get to it, was this was a low Earth launch and not a one that was out over 70 miles in space that takes longer to come down. So I said to Owen, have there ever been any suborbital launches under 71 miles that, 71 miles is what is orbital, suborbital, for example. So Owen found in 1958 the Pioneer 1 was suborbital, so it was under 71 miles, took 43 hours to come down. We calculated ours needed 39 hours to come down. It's perfectly doable that it could have been the GE Mark II that came down, even if it was suborbital and not an orbital launch, which is over 71 miles. So here's what then popped up on WikiLeaks and the internet is now this becomes the Owen Ventre, not Ventre Owen. The Owen Ventre theory is wrong, and they show here's the launch from Johnson Island to Kecksburg. What? It was launched. Everybody knows it was launched suborbital. Antarctica came around, Russia dropped the camera, picked it up. And they also said, maybe it's on the next slide. No, it wasn't. Okay, they said it was successful here. It says it was successful. Here it is December 7th and December 9th, both successful, yet in the paperwork Owen sent me, it was considered unsuccessful. It launched the camera system, but they couldn't find where the GE Mark II went. So, you know, so I say to these guys, do you think the government has always told us the truth? I mean, what would it take? They know that this happened. They caused this to happen in Kecksburg, right? So what does it take to go back to the original records, change the 7th from orbital to suborbital? All you got to add is 3 letters, sub. And now people are going to question it, right? And say, well, it was suborbital, it wasn't high enough to be in space. But we already proved it takes 43 hours to come down, and we needed 39. And you don't think that they would go back and change it from unsuccessful to successful to cover it up? That, to me, is the 2 simplest things they could have done to cover this thing up, because they know they caused it, and it was a government launch. But that's the type of stuff, and it was like, they were so, and I know you made buddies with Molkson, but they were so adamant that 2 guys who weren't professional or even amateur astronomers figured this out, they would not give us any credit for it. And I think it was hubris, and that's the main thing behind these guys, that wouldn't give us any credit and said it went that way. Here you go.
Okay, I wanted you to look at the second entry, the December 9th. There we are. You'll see it. It says it was underneath the SLV-2A, it says Agena D. The Agena D was, again, like a solid fuel booster, but it used liquid fuel. It was capable of turns. It could make maneuvers, make the satellite go higher in orbit, lower in orbit, dive, move, and turn. It was a large piece. It was barrel-shaped. It kind of fits the description that was given by Bill Bulebush of something he saw which was cylinder-shaped. Yet we have other people, and the witness, Jerry Betters, that say they saw a cone shape. So here we are, where our critics said that it just couldn't go, just one reentry vehicle just could not make that distance. Yet on that same 2 days apart, there's an Agena booster, liquid fueled, but still an Agena booster that could maneuver and turn this thing, could keep it in orbit not only for the 39 hours we talked about, but for 4,000 years. So in the same sentence where we're being criticized for information that's bogus, we show them it was very much capable of doing maneuvers just like in Kecksburg. It could make turns, it could dive, it could float. And let me tell you, when I saw it on December 9th. It was coming from my right, or from my left to my right. Now, I'm sure a lot of people here have been in an airport, and you've seen a plane kind of from the gate or from inside lobby, looking out the windows. You kind of get a feel for how far away the plane is. You can see the numbers, the writing on it. You can tell when it's going across the sky what it looks like. In some cases, you can even see inside the windows. Well, this is the kind of view I had. I'm looking at something that's less than a half a mile, certainly more like a quarter mile away. I can see orange, blue, and yellow flames coming out of it, swirling out of it, the back end. The front end is all green. And I've run that through my mind all these years until I finally come up with what I believe is a real solution, which is the secondary booster. All the colors match. I even asked, how is it that I could see with such clarity swirling flames intermixed with other colors? So then I did some research and I found out that sign companies design sign letters 4 foot high to be read a mile away by the average person. So now I got a way to confirm what I had seen, the distance I'd seen it. And all indications to me, when something's flying very slow, by the way, when something's flying very, very slow across the sky in front of you, you have to think something's wrong. It should be falling. It shouldn't be flying. And so that's why I'm pursuing the solid fuel rocket booster now. And keeping in mind, I said the aerodynamic qualities of the Mk2. If you were just to tilt it a little bit, instead of having internal weights, if you use the booster to move it one way or another, it's going to accentuate that movement. And it can climb, drop, turn left or right.
Okay, Owen, you wanted to talk about this one too, the test ban treaty and what this slide means. We just added this one.
Can you go ahead a slide? I want to see what's after this. Okay, we're covering him. This is a picture of President Kennedy. There's President Johnson to the right side.
Who killed him?
According to what they say, yes. This was the signing of the Partial Limited Test Ban Treaty. This is very significant because this may be why we don't hear about Kecksburg. In my mind, there's no reason for Kecksburg not to have been disclosed after all these years. There has to be something really significant tied to it. So what was going on with the test ban treaty? As I said before, there was Operation Dominic, Operation Hardtack, where they set off an explosion in the atmosphere. Very drastic consequences with the fallout, nuclear radiation. The Russians were doing the same thing. Cows were having contaminated milk all over the world. Something had to be done. And so naturally the solution, which would have been to get a treaty between Russia and the United States, which incidentally now is signed by 123 countries. I think it's 123 or 126. It is still in effect since 1963. Truman worked on it, could not get it done, or Eisenhower worked on it, could not get it done. He started in 1957. So when he got out, Kennedy took it over. The idea was, we don't want to set off anything anymore in the environment, which was a hoax anyway, because we did, the Russians did. But the idea was that it was even effective for underground explosions, because an atomic bomb exploding underground can crack the surface. Out comes the contamination. But as I said, everybody cheated on it. So now I'm putting that together, and I'm trying to figure out why that is still so important today. As I said, the 123, 126 countries have signed this, but North Korea hasn't signed it. China looked at it, they didn't ratify it. Iran, there's another one. So Pakistan. So here we have a treaty that we're all trying to honor, but no one really is. And this is what comes up with the Nike Zeus program. The Nike Zeus program may have violated this treaty. And here's the scenario. In 1965, we were sending up at $1 million a clip every one of these Thor rockets and booster rockets as target vehicles for the Nike Zeus missile, the Nike Zeus B to be more specific. They had the Zeus A, Zeus B. The idea was, at that time, they were trying to disable an incoming ICBM. Now, this was before they went to multiple warheads, which kind of threw all this out the door. But the idea was, the partial limited test ban treaty said that they were not going to monitor anything under 4 kilotons atomic explosion. Now, incidentally, Hiroshima was 13 kilotons, I believe. So 4 was deemed a low number that they couldn't monitor anyway. But the plans for the Zeus B was to put a 2, 4, 6, 8 kiloton, all the way up to 25 kiloton bomb, atomic bomb, to knock down an incoming ICBM. They spent millions of dollars on it. And the program even went on to develop the first neutron bomb. How many people knew that? We only found out about neutron bombs, what, 5, 7, 8 years ago, something? They had neutron bombs in the early 60s. They developed even into the late 50s. The idea was, in space, you cannot set off an atomic explosion and have any effect unless you find a way to have an action-reaction where you can throw out something to hit, because it just goes out into everywhere. It's kind of like years ago when they blew up trees on a farm. The farmer would have to tie, and the military does this today when they want to blow something up. You have to tie it against the tree solid so it has something to force against to knock the tree down. Same thing happens in space. If you were going to shoot an atomic missile or a bomb at an incoming ICBM, you have to have something to counteract that force. It works in the atmosphere, but it doesn't work in space. So then they come up with the neutron bomb. Now, we were all told when they come out with a neutron bomb that it would just kill people and not destroy buildings. But that's not necessarily the case. The idea here was very ingenious. A neutron bomb, it fires out mostly neutrons. The idea is, with an incoming ICBM, which at the time was made of plutonium or uranium, if you start a small fission process in that ICBM warhead before it gets the chance to arm and bring to bear the total force of the explosion, the neutrons render the atomic warhead useless. So here we are. We're caught maybe, this goes back to the treaty, we're caught maybe sending up a neutron bomb. We were firing at incoming target ICBMs, ours, and I think that's what landed in Kecksburg. It was definitely an accident. They might have missed it. So that's what gets back to this deal of President Kennedy and the treaty. It is still in effect today.
We only have about 25 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah, or they may have clipped one, and that's why it landed in Kecksburg. Okay, one of the good things that came out of this is when the Post-Gazette put it in the Stars and Stripes website, we got contacted by somebody who we won't tell you his name, who told us about this guy, Gordon H. Rawson, who was the Army Lieutenant Colonel in charge of Kecksburg investigation. So
Recovery.
there, again, you got them lying, because this guy was in charge and they said no Army was there. But he was told it was a Soviet satellite, but that doesn't mean that his bosses told him the truth. So they were sticking to the Cosmos 96 Soviet. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Yes, I do. I had talked to this fella from Maine. He had called me about Gordon Rawson. Well, he called John first. Then John let me know. I was amazed. This fellow from Maine actually was a neighbor of Gordon Rawson. Family, intimate, friends. Gordon's daughter, Gordon's mother, the whole 9 yards. This guy was a spook. He didn't exist. He was on the stage with President Kennedy during the Berlin Wall speech. Maybe some of the older people would remember that. He was in Vietnam as an advisor, yet we can't find a single thing on him in paperwork anywhere. Nothing. Even I called the funeral home where he was buried. He died at 92, I believe, John, 94, something like that, years old. There was a military funeral for him. Nobody signed the papers. Nothing on the guest book.
Yeah, the guest book.
Zero. We know nothing about him. But I was told by this man in Maine that knew the family that he wasn't exactly a hermit, but he didn't watch television. He didn't have any awards, medals on the wall, anything like that. But what is most important was Gordon Rawson admitted to this man in Maine that he's the one that took the documents out of the files and destroyed them. Those were the files Leslie Kean was looking for and Stan Gordon was looking for, Freedom of Information Act. This man took them and destroyed them. Now, his wife said that he really got in a lot of trouble for that. Now, I'm sure it was a slap on the wrist. But he was a lieutenant colonel, and what's more, he's the one that headed up the whole entire recovery operation in Kecksburg.
The reason was he didn't want another international incident with the Soviet Union, so he destroyed the records. Okay, so in my mind, really, what's the bigger mystery here? Was Kecksburg an alien UFO? Was it a spy satellite? Was it the Bell? This is actually a bigger mystery here. We got two guys involved in Kecksburg out of maybe 50 max who get hit and run over and die. Maybe, here's the reporter, John Murphy. He gets hit by a car in 1969, I think it was California, and he gets killed. And Jerry Bennett in 2007 in Connellsville, that's the guy who notarized the drawing, gets hit by a truck in Connellsville. I mean, the odds of that percentage-wise are even higher than what Kecksburg was.
Maybe 3 tonight.
Yeah, it could be. If anybody calls, I'm giving them Owen's room. But one thing I wanted to mention is Fred and I do a UFO talk show. It's on the MUFON PA website and my website, johnventre.com. These conferences, past conferences, and our talk show are on there so that you can watch them online. And we actually make some money. The group, MUFON PA, makes some money off of that. One other thing I just want to say quickly, because Owen's going to show you some more technical stuff. Last year I gave a talk on my haunted experiences, which were 100% true. How many were here for that? Okay. I gave that talk just a couple of weeks, really, after I started writing the book. And that's the book I wrote, so I got it here now. I didn't have it last year at the time. So now we're just going to move on to Owen, and you got about 15, 20 minutes to go through these. There's your button.
Okay. Okay, before we go into this, there ought to be some questions. We went over a lot of stuff. Yes, sir.
Listen to Stan, all right? Back to this.
Can you speak up, or John will give you the microphone?
Okay. The way that Stan Gordon reported this, all right? There was one truck, can you hear me? There was one truck there, one flatbed. Okay. How did they get it on to the flatbed? Second question, it looked like that was actually the two guys carrying the thing up there. They say that they couldn't cut into that thing, even after they got it down to Wright Patterson's. So how did they cut something out of there and take it up there when they said they couldn't? And third, if that thing was so solid, why did spark fires all over the United States where the states had come through? It was spitting fire out. So why was that?
Got all of that?
Well, we'll go one at a time. Let's get the question done with, we'll go on to this. And if anybody else has questions, this is the time. Okay, the first question was, Give me a start on the first question.
Flatbed.
Oh, okay. Let me just use this for an example. The stainless steel reentry vehicle you saw earlier had a base around it. You recall that? In that base, I asked the the museum director in Nassau's museum, National Museum in Washington? That's it, National Aerospace. I asked him to go look at the base of that vehicle and tell me what he saw. In and around it, there's 3 spots for eye hooks to be screwed right down in, where all you have to do is put a lifting harness on it. You could pick it up with a tow truck. It's that simple. And it weighs about somewhere around 1,500 pounds empty.
But nobody mentioned that. When they had the picture of the drawing and everything else, nobody said anything about anything on the back of the truck to pick it up.
Yeah, but if they had a flatbed that went down, like somebody's, you could put it on and draw it up. Yeah.
That's true. I don't know. I never saw very many of them back then, but I'm sure the Army did.
A winch on there, just drawing it up on a flatbed. Tilt the flatbed, just draw it up.
Well, see, the idea of the eye hooks or eye screws, they could be used on either side of that heavy metal because they have to load that reentry vehicle on the top of the rocket. It has to be turned upside down. So they were always there. The lifting devices were there.
Get to the next question, because we're running.
Next question? Next.
Fred, what was the second?
Yeah, what was the second part, Fred?
Allegedly they couldn't cut it when they were there. So how did them 2 guys be carrying that box up there?
Well, I'd say that goes back to what I've been saying I'm going to be getting to as a solid rocket booster. I believe that that's what was used to propel it. We know there was pieces of metal that fell off en route as it came from the Cleveland area, Detroit area, and set fields on fire. We also know that the tar, the chemical thiocol, probably most likely was dropping hot tar, because as you know, if you get a tire on fire, it doesn't go out very quick. It gives off black smoke. And we know that the trail that this left, we have pictures, and many people took pictures, is nothing but a black smoke trail through the sky. So I believe that's what it was, Fred. I believe they have a solid fuel rocket booster.
So that would have been something totally different than the first thing?
Sure.
It was actually 2 things there.
That's right. There was actually 2. And we get to the point then that there were 2 separate search areas. Everybody is convinced that there was just one search area where they saw this acorn, they called it, on the ground and carried it out. Not so. Now we have some records. I found some proof recently that shows there were two separate areas. One where they found the acorn, but they were searching back along the path towards a park called Mammoth Park. They set up camp, that meaning the Army, set up camp there. They were there for 2 days, presumably to disinfect the area, clean up all the evidence that they could find. And I forgot to mention too, Fred, there was aluminum chaff found in Ohio and Pennsylvania. That would be the ideal thing for a Nike Zeus B missile to be able to shoot down, a perfect target, because now they have something that can be moved up and down, back and forth. It can drop chaff to confuse radar. It can drop, in this case, it was dropping structural parts. And we go back to say that I wouldn't even doubt that those structural parts were attached. No one's mentioned that. How would you attach a booster to the acorn? And I say it was probably welded. And that, because people said the marks even looked like weld marks, weld bead marks.
Run through these quick and
Okay.
questions again later.
Okay.
Because we're short on time.
Okay, we'll go through a little bit of history. I would like to go back to this, though. The picture you see on the right-hand side is the original design of the Titan I nose cone. It went almost into full production. It almost went into full production, but the MK4, which is another reentry vehicle used for an atomic warhead, was developed, and this was scrapped. But the point is, look at the inside of this. This is loaded with all kind of electronic gear. I did research on the components that are in it. most of the components are German-designed components. After all, this stuff was made by the Nazi engineers we took in paperclip that worked in Huntsville, Alabama. And so you can see there's nothing mysterious about this, nothing alien, but the people who would have seen this on the ground, and like I said, this is a completely different nose cone. This isn't the MK2, but this was the preferred model. And it fits, again, the very same technology we have. And what we did over here was show these different types of vehicles and how they work within the air, shadow graphs. And you can see that right there, John, the one you had, that was used in Apollo, Mercury, and everything else. So we're on the right track. We know what this looks like and how it behaves. Now these pictures, I believe I did show you earlier, John showed you. This one, here's the reverse video. And here's the area where we had seen a star. Stop it, John. And up here we have another, well, there's John's paintball. Up here was an area I was talking about. But this is very interesting. This is the inventory of rockets that came back from England. This is how it was mounted. The reentry vehicle was mounted. You can see it's perfectly funneled. There's a place here for the umbilical cords to deliver the electronics or monitor the operations, temperature, whatever it'd be sent up for experimentation purposes. How much time we got, John?
We got about 15 minutes,
Okay.
maybe less.
Don't want to rush too fast. Okay, so here we have some bit of an explanation of what they had as far as electronics. I have some later pictures of much better quality, but the idea was on top of this would be set a cylinder, and in that cylinder, I say, could have been the secondary booster rocket. And then on top of that, of course, is the warhead that we see down below. And this picture on the left, this is no more than a launch, but you can see it's quite sophisticated. This is the basic booster here and here. This is a oxygen tank, a fuel tank, and the fuel was really kerosene. And in this area here, this particular rocket is the Agena I was telling you about. Fully maneuverable, this section here. This is all the electronics, and this would be the warhead. And before, this is a later version of a warhead. I think it's like an MK6 or so. But they would, instead of having this on there, they would have the MK2. This is fully capable of orbit and controllable, can go anywhere. Now here was some examples people had sent to us. And the top right is the Phoebus 1A at Los Alamos. Actually, it's upside down in the test bed. This was one of the very first nuclear rocket engines. And somebody thought, well, is this what fell? Because if you can see, it has a large band around here. But this is strictly an engine. And as far as maneuverability, no, it didn't have any maneuverability other than straight up. And Westinghouse was involved, GE was involved, many people were involved in the nuclear rocket. The bottom section, you see the bottom picture, that was sent to us by a guy that said, well, this is probably what was sent up. Well, no, it's not. This, in fact, is a centrifuge and a reactor centrifuge. If you look at the bottom, it's very interesting. Look at all these cables around here. I can't see something like that flying through the air. No one saw anything like that. So we decided that's nothing to be looking at. Huh? Excuse me? Okay. I was working with a guy named Ted Molson from Canada, a very well-respected
Amateur astronomer, right?
I was trying to think, astrophysicist, no, astronomer, amateur astronomer. And so where we're looking at, these pictures were taken in our analysis of where and the direction this thing went. These were actually taken in my hometown. And taken, you can see here, let me show you. This is where I had seen the vehicle. And we can see here these flight paths. This is Oak Hollow Park, this is my sighting, and where it had gone beyond. And so what we were doing was trying to look, you can see from this, just my town here, it wasn't very far to take a look at this as it was coming and going towards Kecksburg. But the idea of it was, if you look at the slide on the right, we were trying to make sure and verify that from my position, which would have been here, we were trying to make sure there wasn't any houses or trees or anything in the way. And we even researched back how many years ago, what trees were cut down. There was nothing to block my view. We're just trying to validate that I had seen what I had seen. Again, we show here again how the line of sight would go through on the house on the left. And this particular house wasn't even involved in the sighting. It was just a test, but just so you could see what the extent we did in the research. On the right-hand picture, this was the very beginning of how we decided how high it was in the sky. We took a reading. You can see this is a post that's put on Google Earth. And when we pick a spot, we know how high I had seen it based on the horizon. From that point, we pick another post. And then we draw a line straight across. We do speed estimate, and we find out just how fast it's traveling, how far away it is, and then we did an Excel file using some special software Ted had, and yea verily, it made its way almost to Kecksburg based on our rough estimates of weights, speeds, and sight and distance. So that validated what we saw. Now here's some example. Ted Molson sent this back to me. The top picture is showing a project called the APX, Auxiliary Package 01, that was launched at Thor, Johnson Island, with a Thor rocket. And it's the section here that, damn it, it's a section here that intrigues me. You'll see there's two sets of fueling hoses. Now our detractors say, well, this would have been the GE Mark II vehicle. And of course, this cover over top. Well, it went a little bit further. There was a camera put up in here, but basically this is all pretty close. But you don't need fuel for this. You need fuel for this. These lines run down further into the rocket. So the configuration I'm seeing looks something more like this. And behind it would have been the solid fuel booster rocket. Doesn't have to be big, and I have a picture of one to show you. Before we go there, though, applications of these secondary boosters, just to give you an idea how these things worked. And these are very early, too. We're talking 40s, 50s here. There's different ways to make them move. This is called a gimbal or hinge. The idea is you can, with a little hinge here, you can move that nozzle one way or another, and that directs the direction of the vehicle. And the other one is a flexible, and then they have vanes where you can steer them. You could steer the vehicle by closing off one side or another of the nozzle. So all this technology was available. There's nothing mysterious about it. It's not alien. We had this technology as a result of the German scientists. Here's some examples on the top left or top right-hand side. That's an Athena booster. Now that's a liquid-fueled one. You can see on the very top of it, right here, that very well looks like the Mk2 vehicle, the flat side. So they had the capability at that time. This is what I think I might have seen, either this or the solid fuel booster, and I'll show you that. There's another example. These are just examples of solid fuel boosters. That's a pretty good size one there. Now, these things only burn in seconds. So I did a calculation of what it takes to get from the time it broke the atmosphere up in Pennsylvania. There was sonic booms and such. I did a calculation how many seconds it would take to get to Kecksburg, and it pretty well matches. Even though the burn time is in minutes, it gets you there, because it didn't take very long for it to go from the first sighting breaking the sound barrier till it got to Kecksburg. Here's another example. They used thiocol rubber fuel, a polyside rubber binder that gave improved performance and a smell of sulfur. And I also have here, we talked about a second crash site second vehicle in Kecksburg. Now here's an example. This is probably my last slide. We'll take questions. Here's an example of a solid fuel rocket booster. This is early. This came from Altair or the Burner 1 secondary booster. Why that's important, in 1965, it was the first time they ever used a solid fuel rocket booster called the Burner 1. It was capable of all 3-axis movements. So here we have all this technology. By the way, this isn't very big. This is probably only about 4 foot long or so, and maybe 1.5 foot wide. But it gave a substantial amount of power after it separated from the main booster. So the bottom line here, and I take a question, the bottom line is there's nothing mysterious about this. This technology had been around since the 40s when the scientists come over from Germany.